May I now request Mr. Rajnath Ram to come up on the stage and give the keynote speech. Mr. Ram, welcome to the summit. I hope you've got a couple of minutes to catch your breath. Mr. Ram, at Niti Aayog, Mr. Ram leads the initiatives on India climate and energy modeling, GIS mapping, and energy data management. His vast experience in the energy sector includes working on formulation of India's energy vision. He coordinated the finalization of integrated energy policy, which was launched in 2008. He was involved in finalizing the PLI scheme for high efficiency solar PV and module manufacturing. He's been actively involved in preparation of the National Green Hydrogen Energy Mission and has played an important role in the development of RE roadmaps for about 8 states. These are, of course, a few highlights of Mr. Ram's contribution. I would like to invite Mr. Ram to the stage for the keynote speech. Just before that, in case folks, if you haven't found a seat to sit on, there is a screen set up in the lower hall in case you would like to sit. My apologies, we don't have enough seats here, but I hope you'll find all these discussions quite useful too. And a quick reminder to have your mobile phone on silent. Thank you. Mr. Ram, over to you.
Very good afternoon to all the distinguished participants for this event. And I'm privileged to be part of this discussion. And many well wishes to the Vasudha Foundations for bringing such kind of discussions and inviting the relevant stakeholders for this discussion. Let me put the perspective of overall government thinking towards the achieving the energy transition and net zero target by 2070. And in the recent past, several initiatives have been undertaken by the government and which have ultimately led to an impressive growth as far as the India is concerned. Even against the global headwinds, India's share in the economic growth is very much impressive. Our GDP estimates is even higher at the global average, and it's hovering around 6.8 to 7.3. Our energy demand appears to be growing around 4 to 5% as compared to the global 1.3%. But the per capita electricity consumption or the energy consumption, we are far below as compared to the world average. The various announcements by the Honorable Prime Minister, whether it pertains to the climate-related activities or apart from the other kind of initiatives promoting more Atmanirbharta, the various schemes like PLI, production link incentive relating to the solar sector and other kinds of sectors has really put India up forefront, and we have become the attractive destination for the investment. As far as the climate-related actions and initiatives undertaken and their impact on the SDG, that is also has been seen and reviewed by the global leaders and the countries that we are
doing fairly well in the entire strategy. And the major SDGs like SDG 7, SDG 13, as many as 1375 climate activities have been undertaken under SDG 7, and as many as 629 activities relate to the SDG 13. So there are many and multifarious activities is undergoing on as far as the climate actions is concerned. On top of that, Mission Life has also significant role, and it clearly connects to the community and the people, and provide them a participative role in the energy transition agenda. As far as the energy transition or NDs, updated NDCs have been announced by the government, and achieving the 50% of non-fossil based capacity by 2030, reduction of 45% emission intensity by 2030. We have from Niti side started several initiatives. We have built up a model. We are working in very close coordination with the respective ministries. We are supporting the Prime Minister Office also. And also the state level initiatives. This time there is a separate budget by the government for a state support mission, and we will be reaching out all the states to support them, handhold them, capacity building as well, for bringing them into the main forum and supporting the achievement of the national goal of what Honorable Prime Minister has envisioned. The RPO analysis, that's one of the important aspects. We are reaching out to the states, and we are supporting them in terms of what should be their balance of renewable energy mix, to whether they have the in-house capacity or whether they need to go for the adjacent states, so that you can minimize the transportation or transmission of your electricity, and thus how the reducing your transmission and infrastructure cost. So those kind of activities will be involving with the states, and will be supporting them. Will be also handholding in terms of building their dashboard, and also capacity building of their team, and institutionalizing some of the tools with them, so that these states should also come forward and take a participatory role in achieving the entire goal of a country. In the recent budget, you might have seen that a lot of initiatives have been towards the climate side, on the green growth side, and almost around 1 lakh crore of budget has been announced under this green growth initiatives. As far as the biodiversity is concerned, almost 7 major diverse countries, and India, almost 329 million hectares land or the areas have been covered under the biodiversity part. And India has its progressive legislation and the framework to take care of all the aspect of the biodiversity and the related issues. And the major challenges again relating to the renewable energy sector would be how this renewable should be developed so that all the community participated, they also should get benefit out of it. So this is in the nutshell from the my side, and I think a lot of supports from the relevant stakeholders, even NGOs and the players which are really working together to fulfill our entire objective of the climate actions and the whatever initiatives have been undertaken or announced by the Honorable Prime Minister and meeting of the climate objective. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ram spoke about the RE targets and land use as well. And continuing the focus on land use, I would now like to welcome Joe Kiesecker to speak about a really interesting tool that they've been developing, which is called SiteRight, and how it went about. In the previous panel discussions, we spoke about what are the solutions to ensuring the RE growth happens in a responsible manner, and this is one of them.
It's really a pleasure and an honor to get a chance to share some of my thinking and thoughts on sustainable energy development. When I was a young professor and researcher about 100 years ago, I think it might be close to 100 years, climate change was something that was going to happen in the future. Well, time has caught up with me, and time has caught up with all of us, because climate change is here now. So it's an exciting time to be talking about renewable energy, but there's a huge sense of urgency because we can no longer drag our heels. We really have to move and move quickly on solutions to climate change. When we talk about climate change, we're really talking about energy. Lion's share of emissions come from energy. We're not going to address climate change without a radical overhaul of our energy system. We spent over a century building an energy system based on fossil fuels. We have a few decades to shift as rapidly away from that as possible. So again, huge sense of urgency. And there's going to be a lot of challenges associated with that transition. Right now, the leading energy sources, renewable energy sources, that will make up the largest portion of the new renewable energy are wind and solar. And the reality is they take a lot of space. That land, that space requirement can potentially create a lot of conflicts. And that conflict, well, there's things that are bad, and I'll talk a little bit about that, impacts the biodiversity, impacts the local communities, but it's those conflicts and those impacts that can slow the transition. So what we want to do is really recognize those challenges and incorporate them into our planning and our thinking so that we can address them. Going to give a little bit of doom and gloom, or backwards looking doom and gloom. This is actually from a study that was published a couple years ago, Rybin et al., and they looked at wind, solar, and hydropower projects globally from a global data set and looked at where the footprints of those plants were. And over 2,000 of them were within protected areas, or KBAs. KBAs are supposed to be the precursors for new protection. So with the CBD, we're trying to achieve 30%. KBAs are supposed to be teed up to be our new next set of protected areas. And about 900 plus facilities that were being planned also in protected areas or KBAs. So not great. Pick on my home country. This is a picture from Virginia, where the leading driver of forest loss in Virginia over about the last decade is solar development. So clearly not on a good trajectory in terms of how development is being put on the ground. It really puts the renewable energy transition right in between the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis. So the amount of energy that we're going to have to build is somewhat mind-boggling. I heard someone say 50 gigawatts just for India on an annual basis. That's a lot, and it's going to take a lot of space. And if it's not planned carefully, it's going to push us further on into problems on the biodiversity crisis. We built a tool that we call Global Renewables Launch in partnership with Microsoft and Planet. And actually that work started right here in India to help feed into the SiteRight tool, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But it's using AI to map wind and solar patterns and arrays. And one of the things it lets us do, as when we ultimately launch it in a couple months, is really track progress at the country level towards their NDC commitments. That's one. And the other is really flag and highlight where country level development patterns are creating land use conflicts, clearing land for things that we don't necessarily want to see impacted. This is an example from Brazil. And so what you can see really quick, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, is for both wind and solar, development is happening on forested areas as well as on agricultural areas. I don't have to say much about the forested areas, that's not good, but one of the leading drivers of deforestation in the Amazon is agricultural production. So if we start displacing agricultural production in a country like Brazil that is super important for its carbon sink, that agricultural production is going to have to go somewhere. It's likely to go into places like the Amazon. So not great. Similar patterns, actually, unfortunately, for India. About 70% of the solar that's been built has been built either on agricultural land or lands that are important for natural conservation, nature conservation. Wind's a little bit better, and wind integrates nicely into agriculture. We can have a conversation about that. At least the way solar development is happening now, it is largely a complete land use replacement. There are ways to integrate solar into ag, but that tends to be the exception, not the rule. So enough on the doom and gloom. The really positive side of all this is that there's a lot of space that's low environmental impact, often low social cultural impact, yet viable for wind and solar. This is actually from a study that we published. It was a global look that translated NDC commitments into actionable renewable energy targets, and then looked at where and how we could meet those in low conflict places. And what we found is there's about 17 times the area needed to meet those NDC commitments. The reality is, though, from past patterns, is it's not happening in that way. So we need a radical shift and change in how we think about, we plan and develop renewable energy projects. One is the project by project mentality is way too slow. We're never going to get to 50 gigawatts every year if we still do one project at a time. We don't do an EIA process. Someone mentioned that. But even if you bring an EIA process into the mix, that's not going to be the right way to get it done. So we need a completely different shift on our thinking and on our planning. One of the things that we're really focused on is trying to identify renewable energy go areas. Conservation communities very comfortable telling developers and government where development shouldn't go. But what we're doing is, when we do that, we also do that. I want to make that really clear, and you'll see that through this as I walk through this process. We're also trying to turn the analysis and the planning around and also identify places where development can go. It gets in a very uncomfortable space, but I think it's a key call to action for not only the environmental community, but civil society in general, to start convening these kinds of processes to help identify renewable energy go areas. So I'm going to just walk through this really quickly on a generalized framework that underlies our thinking on SiteRight as a tool. Yep, we got to. Here we go. Okay. So the first piece of this is really thinking about the energy. What does the wind and solar development need? What are those resource thresholds? or land use constraints, elevation, slope, those kinds of basic pieces. We set the stage. We also need to think about what's feasible for development. Those areas, are they close to load centers? Do they have the transmission capacity? Do they have the roads and access? And we narrow that field a little bit. We also need to take into account things like legal exclusion, so protected areas, areas that are going to be important for expansion of our protected areas as we try to hit our CBD targets. In India, that would include things like tiger corridors. Then there are a bunch of environmental values that may not be legally protected, but if ignored, are likely to get pushback on projects. Someone mentioned the Great Indian Bustard. That might fall into this category, for example. We have to consider those kinds of things. Otherwise, I think they're going to come back and create significant problems. The other is social cultural values. So these can be historic, religious sites. They can be how tied to the local landscape individual communities are, dependent on land for their livelihoods. Failure to consider environmental and social values, there's mounting data that shows it increases cost overruns of projects, increases costs, and increases the probability that projects don't happen. So if we don't consider them, we're only going to slow the transition. Once we have all that data organized, we can start to look at, so we have a suite of places that are low conflict. We can rank them, look at the energy production capacity. We can run different kinds of scenarios. We can say, hey, is there enough space to meet our renewable energy targets on some of these low conflict areas? We can look at business as usual scenarios. There's a variety of things you can do with it. And that's essentially what SiteRight does. Takes that framework and puts it into a publicly available, easy to use tool. Going to get a chance, I think, to demo that in just a little bit. A really quick 3 modules. One is the awareness module. It's really trying to let people understand what are the consequences of business usual development, where might impacts occur, what space is available for low conflict. The site assessment module, which takes a suite of environmental and social values and allows a developer or a government entity to screen a project. You can draw a polygon on the screen, or you can upload a shapefile, and it gives you a report back that tells you what might be there, so you understand the risks. And then last is the planning module. So if you're a developer and you want for 100 megawatts of solar in a particular district or state, it will use those same site variables in the site assessment module, run an optimization that gives you some options that are meet the energy targets, but are also incorporate some of those social and environmental values. So it's a starting point. I will let my colleagues who are going to walk through the SiteRight tool. It's online. Go play with it. You can't break it. We definitely, we're interested in feedback. It's available right now for 9 states, and those are the 9 states where about 80+% of the renewable energy is projected. So ultimately, we want to cover the entire country, but we've got a good start with those 9 states. You also might check out some of the other sites that we have that discusses some of our work on low conflict renewable energy development. I appreciate the attention and look forward to the conversation. I don't know if there's a chance if anyone has any quick questions, or that's up to you. Okay. Freely available, yep. It's you can go to that website and you can have access to all the data and information that's there. Okay, we got just one more. Yeah.
Just wondering, you mentioned that a lot of the site choices so far have not really followed this framework. Apart from the fact that someone didn't make the effort of making this up, but any other reason or any restricting factor due to which maybe other sites have been considered which have not been so socially excellent, let's say?
It's a great question, and I will admit, I think we're really trying to understand what is ultimately at the heart of essentially a failure to recognize some of these environmental and social values. I mean, I think at the end of the day, a lot of it is just, it's the low-hanging fruit. It's close to transmission, it's has good resource potential, and it's those factors that are driving the selection of sites. Now, our research shows that you can have that. You can have the environmental and social cultural and still have those energy needs and the conditions that are really driving energy development. I mean, ultimately, it's a key head scratcher as to why development is proceeding in that manner. And I will say I don't know exactly why, for sure. Certainly not here in India, but even globally. These patterns are the same whether you're looking in the US, Europe. So, thanks.
Thank you, Joe. And my apologies again if you're not able to take a lot of your questions. Joe, I think you're around during lunch, and Joe is very happy to answer your questions. I would now like to invite the speakers for the next panel discussion, continuing the theme on land use and ensuring environmental and social safeguards. If I can invite Mr. Ram, Sushil, Shrestha, Hari, Raman, Pooja, and Sanjay to the stage. You might see your names here. Sushil, I think you can take the name instead of Joseph as well. This panel discussion will focus on some of the challenges, best practices, and optimal solutions for promoting low-impact RE siting and RE development in India, and what it means to safeguard environmental issues and social interests of communities as well. The panel will be moderated by Dr. Sushil Sehgal, who's the Program Director at the Nature Conservancy, and has worked extensively on the intersection of conservation and development, including energy. Before we begin the panel, may I please request some of the folks who are standing, there are a few seats that are emptied out here. So if you'd like to move forward, take the seats that you see here. You might want to rest your legs a little bit as well. Sushil, over to you.
Thank you so much, Akram. I mean, as he has already mentioned, I am not Joe Kiesecker. Joe Kiesecker is here, but I'm Sushil Sehgal. I'm also with TNC, like Joe. It's a great privilege to have the chance to moderate this panel, which is not only touching on a very, very important issue as we have discussed right through the morning, but also to have this really esteemed panel members with us. So I think I'll just start with just a very few thoughts. We have, I believe, about 45 minutes or so for the panel. I'll very briefly start with a few of my own thoughts, and then I'll pass on to the panel members to introduce themselves very quickly. And then there are these couple of questions that I'll be posing to each of the panel members, like what we did in the previous sort of round. So let me just first start again with this broader issue of achieving our very, very ambitious RE targets while ensuring environmental and social safeguards. I think that's the crux of this panel, and I think it has been touched upon even in the previous panel and Joe's presentation and the presentation by Mr. Rajnath and other sort of speakers that went before. It is quite some data that we keep hearing always is that, of course, on some of the aspects of India, like we have only about, even though we are the 7th largest country in the world, we have around 2.4% of the area of the world, and we are sustaining 18% of the population, which I think if the recent media reports are to be believed, we may already be the world's most populous country, having overtaken China recently, or maybe, if not officially, but certainly the media reports suggest that. However, what is less known is that in spite of having this kind of sustaining such a huge population on 2.4%, we are also one of the mega biodiverse countries in the world. We are the 10th most forested country in the world. We are one of the few centers, Vavilovian centers of agri-biodiversity and origin of domesticated plants in the world. We have set aside approximately a fourth of our country's geographical area as forest lands, which are kind of a proxy for various other natural lands also, which are could be grasslands, could be wetlands, and so on as well. Then we also have this issue of common land was touched upon. So there are some estimates, Foundation for Ecological Security, of which we have a representative on the panel. They have been working a lot on the commons issue. So the country also has a lot of common land. But I want to focus on another sort of area which is kind of quite mistaken. That's the issue of wastelands, the so-called wastelands. And I started my career with an organization called Society for Promotion of Wastelands Development. So I kind of know a little bit on the subject. We did discuss a lot. And I was fortunate enough to start my career with likes of Dr. Kamla Chaudhary, who not only is credited with his first faculty member of IIM Ahmedabad, Indian Institute of Management Ahmedabad, and great institution builder. She was also went on to become the first head of National Wasteland Development Board when it was set up way back in 1985. But then, when I looked a little deeper on this subject during my PhD as well, so this is quite a misnomer. Actually, if you look deeply into the historical perspective, and I did go back to the records available in the British Library and the India office in UK also, they're all, the driving force was sort of revenue. If the lands were not generating revenue for the government, they were kind of wastelands. If you look at some of the kind of descriptions of the wastelands from that era, they were not really degraded lands. They were lands that were simply not under agriculture or amenable to generating revenue for the government at that time. So I think we need to bear that in mind. Then on the issue of the social sort of dependence, a few years back, the Forest Survey of India had done an exercise. They just saw that how many are the forest fringe villages in India. It came out to about more than a quarter of 170,000 villages, they said, are forest fringe villages, which have huge dependence on forests and other natural resources. We have, commons I've already sort of spoken about. Also, it is not much appreciated outside India when people talk about indigenous peoples, and they think of countries like Brazil or some other places, Americas. But what we call scheduled tribes, we have one of the largest sort of population, and a lot of people are still quite connected to the natural resources, quite dependent, as you can see, in terms of fodder, medicinals, fuel wood, and non-timber forest products. We also have the largest livestock population in the world, which, the huge dependence on the land for that as well. With this, I will now pass on to my panel members. Very quickly, I'll say we have a very, very eminent panel. We have Dr. Sanjay Vashisht, who is the founder and CEO of First Green Consulting. Sanjay, do you want to maybe say a few more words about what you do and a little bit more on your background?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I represent First Green Consulting. My name is Sanjay Vashisht, and having worked for last 12 years in renewables, we have been working as a consulting company to the project developers and have been engaged by the project developers in various capacities, right, for the large solar park developments as well as the small rooftop solar projects. Prior to starting First Green Consulting, I have been in Suzlon, so that's bringing my experience in solar as well as wind. I'm happy to be part of this panel to share my thoughts on the development of large scale and how the communities can participate in this. Thank you.
I think it might be simpler if we just maybe you can go next, and then we can just pass the mic along.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pooja Chandran. I'm representing the Foundation for Ecological Security, where FES works directly with local communities in over 14 states to strengthen community-led governance of commons. And I'm an environmental lawyer by training, and with FES, I'm working as a legal researcher on the issues of polycentric governance and social security and biocultural rights. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I am Marikrishna KV from Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy based out of Bangalore. So I basically work on the transmission network, planning to integrate more renewables into the network. We mostly collaborate with utilities where we get a lot of data and model entire transmission network at state level and at regional level. And we also provide transmission network strengthening measurements to integrate more renewables into the network. Yeah. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rajnath from Advisor Energy from Niti Aayog. So I'm responsible for the program and policy related to the energy sector, including the atomic power. And I'm also leading the initiatives of the energy modeling unit within the Niti Aayog. So we have a very good team, and they are working on the net zero energy transition pathways for the country. And we are supporting the states in a big way to how to transform the energy, the states and bring them on board for the energy transition aspect. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, for inviting me in this panel, because I don't specifically work on energy, but what I work is on just energy transition. So I'm heading the Just Transition program at the International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology. My name is Rajnath. The program is, in fact, was born out of our work on energy and climate change. But then looking at the issue of just transition, which is a very cross-cutting issue across sectors, industrial sectors, it is moving on to the agricultural sector as well. So we have developed a center in 2021, in fact, which is called the India Just Transition Center, which is basically a platform to bring together various actors, stakeholders from India, national and subnational levels, but as well as from the global south. And this year in G20 presidency, we see how important the global south position is becoming in global negotiations with respect to energy transition, climate action, and also equitable development. As iForest works on various issues beside this, which in fact supports the program which we have been discussing a little bit today, which is on pollution and waste management, natural resource management, which all somehow also feed in the bigger goal of climate change action and climate justice. So I'll talk to that, and thank you.
Hi, I'm Raman Mehta. I work in Vasudha Foundation. Through my career, I started off in biodiversity conservation and wildlife management issues, and then branched out into development, climate, and the interface between the three. So I have exposure on all three sorts of pillars of sustainable development, so to speak. Currently, at Vasudha Foundation, we are looking at climate and energy issues in a detailed manner, and we're also into developing databases in a big way. And one of the databases that we are working on is the India Climate and Energy Dashboard, which we are doing in collaboration with the Niti Aayog. So that's my introduction.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, all the panel members. As I said, I'll be posing some questions to individual panel members, and I request you to kind of be brief, maybe a couple of minutes or so. You can respond so that we keep some time in the end for some questions from the audience as well. So my first question is to you, Hari. So now we have heard a lot about this, this land sort of footprint of renewable energy, solar and wind projects particularly. So in your view, are there any solutions through which this land footprint could be reduced?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, apart from ground-mounted solar and onshore wind turbines, we do have a lot of other options in India, like government, like anyway, National Institute of Wind Energy has come up with offshore wind potential of around 127 gigawatt of offshore wind potential for India, because India is covered with almost like more than 7,600 kilometers of coastal line, and mostly these offshore wind potential are near Tamil Nadu and Gujarat. Tamil Nadu is having almost like more than 35 gigawatt, and Gujarat is having more than 36 or 37 gigawatt of wind potential. So we are to tap the offshore wind potential in India, and the rest will come across the coastal of Odisha and also coastal of Maharashtra. So this is one more option we have to tap in India. So even though the technology is new to India, so we can buy technology from Europe and all. But the other the challenges associated with is like transporting the wind panel is a cumbersome task. So I think government has to take some initiatives to develop the manufacturing facilities across the coastal area. So I think, but otherwise the government has come up with some other incentives like transferring the infrastructure, transmission infrastructure from the coastal offshore wind turbines to the onshore substation is up to the government's risk. So it is already mentioned in the offshore wind energy policy. So other area apart from this offshore wind energy is like if we can use the abandoned coal mines, this will be like we can go with some solar plants. So China has already demonstrated one project, like they have commissioned almost like 300 megawatt of solar plant on the abandoned coal mine, like wherever the coal is extracted, and by filling the void of these coal mines, we can go with a lot of solar potential. So as of in 2021, so Minister of Coal has come up with, they mentioned that like around 29 coal mines are abandoned in India. I mean the coal is already extracted, and they have added for filling those coal mines with ash and all. So if you can, even if you can use those 29 coal mines for solar plants, I think the area they have mentioned is around like some 981 hectares. That means like we can install more than 500 megawatt of solar plants by in that widened coal mines. So on the other option that includes like if you can go with the retired thermal plants areas. So in 2018, CA has come up with National Restrictive Plan, where it has listed some 22 gigawatt of solar plants for retirements in the from 2017 to 2022. So among these, almost like some more than 10 gigawatt of thermal plants have been retired in this time frame. So even if we can use this land for solar power development, almost like for each megawatt of thermal plant, the land requirement is of the order of like 0.6 acres to 1 acre. So among these 10,000 acres, if we can utilize properly, we can still install 2,000 megawatt of solar plant in this retired. The advantage with this retired thermal plants area, and also with the coal mines, is that we don't need to go for new transmission infrastructure, because transmission infrastructure is already there. So if we can use this wisely, we can come up with a lot of solar plants and offshore wind, and also the onshore wind plants respectively.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hari. So there are, a lot of options that are available which are coming up for reducing the land footprint. So you did, apart from like offshore, you mentioned, and a few others, I'm sure like some of the audience members will have questions maybe on that, but further details. But you also mentioned abandoned, coal mines and lignite mines. I know iForest has been working on like those sort of issues. So Shrestha, can you just build on that further, and can you just explain what sort of potential do we have for repurposing coal and lignite mines for renewable energy development?
Yeah. At iForest, one of the things we have been really looking into how some of the states which will be most hard hit by the transition can also diversify the economy, substitute revenue and create jobs. Because that is going to be the biggest question. And without it, a transition cannot happen. And that has led us to the question of looking into what are the potential ways to diversify the economy. And one of the biggest ways is to, of course, boost renewable energy. Now, when you think of renewable energy, the challenge is also, the transition that is happening and going to happen largely is in the states of eastern India, such as Chhattisgarh, Orissa, Jharkhand. The challenge is also that these states have a large amount of area under tribal land. They have, like Chhattisgarh, almost every coal district is a Schedule 5 district. So there is a challenge in acquisition of land or, diversion. Therefore, what we looked into is what is the potential of repurposing the land that is available with coal mines, eventually when slowly mines start closing, be it because of, exhaustion of resources, uneconomic production, or some accelerated closure within the next 3 to 4 decades due to the climate action. Now, when we look at this, overall I need to give some understanding that there is about 0.34 million hectares of land that is available with coal mines in India. And out of this, about 67% of land is available with open cast mines. Now, why I'm saying open cast mines? Because how you can use the land depends on the ownership of the land. Now, if it's underground mines, a lot of times the surface right is already with the government and there are some activities already going on there. For example, there are schools, there are, other infrastructure, many things. But the key opportunity therefore lies with repurposing of the land that is available with open cast mines. Now, these are the land that is available with largely mines that are currently operational, going to close down, say because of age in the next 10 to 15 years and all. But then there is also a large amount of land that is available with abandoned or discontinued mines. And as per the estimates of the Government of India of February 2022, there are 293 such mines in India, combining open cast and underground. And out of these, 284 are with Coal India Limited. So here is the opportunity. And if we look into the statistics, out of these, 75% of abandoned mines are concentrated in the Indian states, largely in Jharkhand, West Bengal and Chhattisgarh. Now, if I do an overlap of the amount of land that is available with coal mining in eastern region states, which is about 0.2 million hectare out of the 0.4 million hectare, and I look into the abandoned mine land potential that is available with this, it's a huge amount of land. But not all of that land can be used for RE development because it depends on, there are voids, there are overburden dams, there are insights, so not all that. But even if we take part of it, because there is a lot of land that is available with identified as built up area as well as stabilized overburden. These are the two, as iForest we analyzed about now 50 mine closure plans. And if we analyze that, the significant potential lies with stabilized overburden areas as well as the built-up areas that are available after post-closure. And this is the land that is most opportunistic for developing, particularly solar. I'm not getting into anything else, but at least it's huge potential for solar energy. The other reason we think it is an important is because also, we have been talking about how energy access can be improved in these areas, how they can, fulfill their RPO requirements. And one of the key opportunities is that not a lot of RE investment today are going to these states which are going to face transition challenges. So therefore, this provides an opportunity, in fact, for these states to develop their in-house RE potential which will also lead to economic diversification, job creation, as well as revenue substitution. And Sujay, as you have been talking about, alienation of land, land acquisition, the challenges of getting clearances, all of that sort, a lot of this can be actually precluded if this land is. So this is what we have been trying to do at iForest. The good news is also that there is quite amount of Government of India support now to do this. In fact, in April 2022 this year, the Union Cabinet has come up with a policy guideline observing that there is a lot of amount of land that is available with abandoned mines, with the coal industry, that has been acquired by under the Coal Bearing Areas Act, can be used for energy infrastructure development. Now, this energy infrastructure development not necessarily means everything is RE. There are many, many things that are under it, but one of the things that is there is RE. Because I'll stop to this because there are challenges also with transfer of land just to any industry or government to develop energy infrastructure. Because the land that is acquired, and most of the coal mining land has been acquired under the Coal Bearing Areas Act, is today with Coal India Limited. So the government has come up with a mechanism, at least for the time being, that some of this land can be used for energy infrastructure development, including RE. So between the policy side and between, if we look into the statistics, and I hope there will be more policy reforms and policy initiatives taken up, a huge amount of land can be opened up potentially in all of these states for RE development, and to address some of the key questions of energy transition that we all are grappling with, how to create jobs, how to substitute revenue, and how to bring in industrial investments in these areas. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shrestha. Now, moving on to this, to Raman. I mean, you said that also that, of course, you are quite nicely placed because you worked on biodiversity issues for many years before. Now you're working a lot on the renewable energy issues. So, now the question to you is that, what do you see like this, if the RE projects are not planned in a responsible manner, what could be the potential impact on biodiversity?
So, in terms of the actual impacts on biodiversity, basically, in a RE context, they arise out of careless siting, to put it, bluntly. And like Joe said, already alluded to the fact that it's not just in India, but globally, the norm by the RE industry has been careless siting. And that's kind of led to these sorts of impacts. So there are also then these associated kind of impacts or secondary impacts where if you are not careful about, when you set up a project, then you're not careful about how you are going to evacuate the power that you generate. And that evacuation process leads to further biodiversity loss like it happened in the Great Indian Bustard sort of case. This has been discussed. A lot of panelists, even in the first panel, have already alluded to this, that we need to get into a sort of a protocol, an industry protocol, which looks at siting very, very carefully after integrating and, taking on board biodiversity concerns. Now, so one is that I would like to just briefly touch upon why is it that we want to preserve biodiversity. One is that there is a direct sort of economic benefit to many, many people. So in India alone, they say that about 200 million people depend directly on biodiversity resources for their food, and their medicines and so on and so forth, and their livelihoods. So that's a huge number, of people. And the other part is that, we don't always make this association, but a large amount of economic prosperity or economic development is also underpinned by, natural resources, environment, biodiversity. And if you lose biodiversity, if you lose your natural resources, your underlying progress tends to get arrested in the long run. I mean, there's this celebrated case of what's happening in Joshimath. I mean, you keep ignoring environmental issues and environmental impacts, and stuff happens. So, I don't want to derail the discussion and, talk about it too much, but that's the sort of risks we are looking at. So I would actually, a lot has been said about, how to integrate EIA processes, about how to, be careful in terms of siting and so on. People have alluded to the fact that there is a cultural problem in terms of, integrating biodiversity concerns into project planning, project, execution, project development, and project operation. But I would like to sort of, use this forum to appeal especially to industry, because they are the ones that kind of drive behavior, in a sense, within the ecosystem, to be a little more sensitive and a little more knowledgeable than they are at the moment, or that's what to us outside the ecosystem of RE developers seems to be the case, that they're not sensitive enough, and they don't, acquire enough knowledge about these sorts of concerns and integrate them into their project planning process, which is what needs to happen in the first place. And the reason why this is important is also because wherever so we are now saying let's have an EIA kind of process in renewable energy projects also. But, having looked at how the EIA process itself used to work, or has been working, or continues to work, I'm not sure we are achieving anything by doing those sorts of EIAs. And I don't want to derail the discussion on what happens in the EIA process and how that process is followed. But that also is primarily driven by this whole pressure, again, primarily by the industry, and this is not, I'm not specifically alluding to the RE industry, but, industries across the board, where they tend to kind of look at that whole process as a compliance issue, in terms of, okay, we need to, check this box and get going. And so that is something that needs to change. How that will change, what will drive that change is something that one needs to think about. But in a nutshell, that's what. The other point I wanted to make about land, just a quick point. And, people alluded to India's target, 500 gigawatts and so on and so forth. I'm saying even, and this is a quick back of the envelope calculation, even if we were to do, say, 1,000 gigawatts, 1,000 gigawatts, the amount of land that we require, say, for solar, and if I was to just go overboard and say another 1,000 gigawatts of wind, I think the amount of land that we actually need, if you were to multiply, what land is required to set up this capacity, that land area is less than 1%. I doubt if it is, even exceeds 1% of India's land mass. We can find 1%, if we were careful enough, and if we were, willing to sort of be careful. So that's, and so therefore we should also not, and that's the other message I want to give, we should not be worried about the recently signed Global Biodiversity Framework, to which India is also signatory, where we are saying 30% of land and 30% of water to be brought under conservation/protection. And that's a target that is to be achieved by 2030. That's where I'd like to stop.
Thanks, Raman. So, moving on, the similar question to you, Pooja. Your organization has been working a lot with local communities across India. I know I've been associated in some way with your organization in the past, not as an employee, but generally somebody as a partner. And we have, so I've observed that you have been working very closely for many, many years and decades. So the same question that I posed to Raman, but now from the local community's perspective. So what risks do you see of this expansion?
Thank you for the question. So, so you said that, so we don't directly work on energy, but we work directly with local communities and how they are responding to the changes and the effects of land use changes in general. But if I zoom out a little bit, the question also comes down to the fact that who are these local communities that we're talking about? Because the priority of each and every community is different. It may not always be homogeneous in nature. So that's keeping that one fact in mind. I think the second question, when we also look at like where is this land even coming from, and as has been established since the morning that we're looking at arid and semi-arid regions. The wasteland narrative, again, we've also touched upon today, that largely it's also a tip to our colonial legacies that we're still carrying on, and the narrative as well, which is which continues to dominate our perceptions as well. And to also somewhere partly answer the question that was raised earlier, that is primarily why we also are looking at these lands, because we think it doesn't have productive value, or it's uncultivable, or you know, it should be diverted to more productive uses. But there's a huge subset that we're ignoring in that process. I think farming communities we already know of, because, and for that too, I think 85% of the farmers in the country are small and marginal farmers. So they own less than 2 hectares of land in general, which in itself is such a stark fact. But there are also other communities which completely go under the radar. The pastoral communities are one. If we're talking about like coastal projects, we're talking about fishing communities, we're talking about salt pan workers, we're talking about forest dwelling populations, not just indigenous tribes, but for people who depend on forests in general, denotified tribes. So there are a lot of different kinds of communities that we don't yet understand, and we are yet to even engage with in the first go itself, and who definitely need to be a part of this conversation too. So they also, if you look at the laws that we also have, so the LAR Act was referred to in the morning, but if you look at the perception of that act itself, it's also talking to the landowners. We're still talking to the farmers, and we're not talking to the farm laborers, people who are dependent on the land but may or may not have a title. So there are, of course, livelihood impacts, which we have been talking about since the morning. But when we're talking about commons as well, which again is dominated in, which if you look at all the states which have the maximum capacity, there is a huge population which depends on commons in these areas. So over here, we're not yet engaging with these communities in the first step. So this is the first thing that we also need to take into account. But when we talk about commons, is also the cultural and the socio-cultural values that are associated with land. Their lives are deeply entrenched, and they are deeply intertwined with the land and the landed resources that they depend on. So we're also talking about a loss of cultural identity, alienation, and displacement is something which is just going to compound that. So these are some of the things that can directly impact them, but the indirect impacts could be, say, the consumption or overconsumption of water if a park has been installed in the nearby area. So, and again, because these are dryland areas, that's going to have a much, much bigger role to play when we're looking at all of these facts. So these are some of the things that I also thought I'd flag. So one thing we've talked about already is bringing environmental impact assessments, but I think I would also echo what Raman said, that what we need is a better public discourse. What we need is a bigger policy commitment to these issues, and a mandatory EIA or an SIA is just going to be one step in the process, but definitely we need a higher consciousness to start talking about these issues.
Yeah, thank you, Pooja. So just moving on in the same spirit, invite now Sanjay to actually comment on what in your opinion is the current state of play with respect to community participation and their sort of free informed and prior free and informed consent regarding these projects as RE projects are rolled out. So can you comment on that?
Thank you. See, we have to see that this journey of renewable development started way back in 2010, especially solar. Wind started another 10 years back. So it's a 20 years journey. Initially it was wind, but then the solar came up in a big way, and now we are close to about 100 gigawatt of installation, and about 500 gigawatt are the targets which we are talking right now. So wind was not a problem in terms of the community participation and all that, but when it came to solar, we started barricading the land and people had the restriction of movements, and we have seen few photographs circulating in WhatsApp groups that farmers are breaking the solar panels and they are angry farmers, and over the period we have realized that people are not having belongingness to those things. The original idea was like, we are a country with a lot of farming, related activities, and if solar is also becoming a third crop to the farmer, then it will help in reducing the migration from the rural areas to the urban centers. Certainly, this has a potential to address that problem, but what happened? In 2010, we started with 1 megawatt type of projects. In 2005, we became a typical 5 megawatt types projects, and bids were like that. A couple of years later, we became like 50 megawatt, and now we are like 500 megawatt tenders are there. And the business, which was like, forget about community, even the business houses, like it was participation by 500 people. Now it is hardly a dozen of people only command the whole sector. So that has led to certainly a price discovery, which we are seeing. We are feeling very happy that we have reached to a price level of some 2.5 rupees or close to 2 rupees sometimes. But what we have gained out of it, the idea is that we wanted to involve the communities in this whole process. So the second thought came that Prime Minister Kusum scheme was also launched. And not only the pump houses, but the idea was that let them install solar in their farms, whatever land they have. The downside of land they can cultivate, and the surplus power they can sell. On paper, it looks a very good idea. And a target of some 10,000 megawatt was given for this part. It was good that people started feeling happy, now I can install solar. And they gone back. Because we come from consulting community, we were laughing that this scheme will not take off. The current status is like out of 10,000 megawatt of target, hardly 50 megawatt has been realized, commissioned. So that's the outcome. Reason? No subsidy in that component of Kusum scheme, which involves the up to 2 megawatt installation. The farmer want to go to take loan. He is asked for the collaterals, wherefrom he will bring the collaterals. The interest rates are 12% plus. And finally, the tariff, the so-called feed-in tariff, which we talk, it is 3 rupees 15 paisa. Okay. No working paper has been shared that this is how we bring the tariff of 3 rupees 15 paisa. Every time when we started the solar in 2010, we were having a discussion paper that this is how the tariff, feed-in tariff. We are not talking of reverse bid, we are talking of feed-in tariff at farmer level. We have to be honest about this community. While the farmer is crying that he is not getting adequate price for his commodities to be sold, the same thing is happening that even if he has a produce commodity, that is the solar power, he is not being adequately compensated to that. What if we pay 1 rupees more to these farmers and buy that electricity? It doesn't matter. For government, it will address a huge problem of migration to the urban areas. We are giving so many things as subsidies. Forget about the subsidy. Just increase the price viability so that this 10,000 megawatt target should become to 20,000 megawatt. We have realized, of course, the scheme was over and the government is coming up with yet another 1-year extension. I am sure those things will be addressed as part of community participation. We have seen solar farms in Europe where the grass grazing is allowed by the sheep and buffaloes. It is not being allowed. So a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we will address.
So, yeah, okay. Is that a hard stop, or can we get another 5 minutes or so? Because they're telling us that we have only 5 minutes. Anyway, so what we'll try to wrap up, because I wanted to give some chance to audience members if possible. But anyway, I think quickly now to Rajnath ji, your kind of views on like what is the thinking, or what would be your advice, because you are the primary sort of think tank on behalf of the government on these issues, or whether have you already given some advice, or are you like formulating, or what could be your advice?
Bruno, I was hearing to all the panelists here. The biggest problem for the country is the land acquisition. I mean, it's not very easy task, and so a lot of problem there. But coming back to the RE part, the estimate for the 750 gigawatt of solar has been on the base of the waste, 3% of wasteland. And the wasteland is largely on the control of the government. I think government has to really come forward, and they have to identify the right kind of land for the installation of renewable energy sources. That's one part. The second aspect, again, I mean, some of the biodiversity area, that needs to be also taken care. Already we have the legislative provisions, but the government, the state government has to clearly, I mean, take care, including even the central government, to take the utmost care of the biodiversity part. So that's important. Like the GIB the case, which unnecessarily, I mean, around 8 gigawatt of solar installations lying idle, and we are not able to move ahead. If due care had been taken by the respective agency, probably this problem would have not risen. So that is also, but again, I mean, government is taking steps, and they are pursuing with the, I mean, all kind of source of approaching the Honorable Supreme Court for resolving the issues. So that's another part. But there are a lot of opportunities still available where we can significantly reduce our land requirement for the RE sources. One, of course, one panelist, Mr. Hari, has mentioned about the offshore wind, and a lot of potential exists within the country, and government is coming forward, and the two sides on the east of the Tamil Nadu and the west of Gujarat has been identified, and almost 70 gigawatt kind of potential. But the government has to come forward because this wind power is, offshore wind power is costly. Government has to come forward, and they have to really take charge of the building the infrastructure, and they have to provide a really base for building the offshore wind platform. So that's one aspect. Certainly, another big giant is the solar rooftop, and that has really not taken forward. If that is taken in a very serious mode, and I think a lot of your land acquisition part would be taken care of. But again, the problem lies with the estates, DISCOM being the main, I mean, the player here, and they find that this is RE is their biggest enemy. So they delayed the process for coming out of the net metering, and I mean, so many issues, and so that's one big area. I mean, certainly, if solar rooftop is taken in a big way, it can really change a lot of solution. Again, the MNRA has come out with the estimation of your wind power. If you increase your mast height, so your repowering can be done. So that could be another potential area where we can look for the reduction of land use. But we, at the same time, we have to also look for the other kind of resources like hydro. Hydro is a big potential for the country, and almost 150 gigawatt, and we are hardly harnessed around 47, 48 gigawatt. But still 100 gigawatt, there is potential. So we are working very closely with Ministry of Power and the respective states, so how this can be expedited and taken in a mission mode. The other aspect has been mentioned about the repurposing of land, the coal mine area, and etc. There are also, I see, a big problem. Reason being, by already some economic activities are there, and people are greatly attached with the mines area. They have their livelihood. Unless they find a clear visibility where about their livelihood, they are not going to shift or leave that position. So that's the one major problem we are facing in the Jharia coal mine, where the fire has taken a long time, but still we are not able to displace the people. Even the government has taken a huge push, and they're building the entire infrastructure, they're building housing, everything, but people are still so emotionally attached, they are not able to move. So how to tackle these issues? This is the big area, I think, really in the just energy transition. We have been talking so much, and Sister has talked about this. So that's another area we really have to see in a big way. But anyway, I mean, this is a part and parcel of the problem, but the role that we are trying to envisage from the government side to how to bring the state on board for towards achieving the entire vision for the country.
Yeah. Thank you, Rajnath. We are, I think, out of time. But I would like maybe each panelist, if just 10 seconds each, if you have to give one idea only, based on, for the RE sector to incorporate environmental or social concerns so that we achieve, our targets and goals, just one idea. If you want to say just one thing, what it will be. I think we can start with Raman and just end, but just 10 seconds each. We are actually really out of time.
Okay, I'll try to do it in 10 seconds. I think be more sensitive to and seek more knowledge on biodiversity and environmental issues before you plan your projects.
Thank you. Krishna, you can just pass the mic.
So very briefly, because we are working towards we are talking of green growth, and I would really hope that we have the necessary mechanisms in place to support this green growth where it is most necessary, instead of where the momentum is already there, that is growing. But we would definitely and that's why I gave the examples of certain states. And as Rajnath ji shared, one of the biggest challenges will be for bringing the states on board, because the states and the center has to work together on this, because land is a very critical issue, and it is in the concurrent list of our constitutions. We need to be careful about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think bringing awareness to the people and also showing them a path that how the green initiative can help improving their life.
Thank you.
Yes. So 10 seconds is we need to work on the untapped potential offshore wind energy and other areas like canal top, floating PV, railways, roadways. So if we can tap some of these options, I think we can still achieve 5 gigawatt in an easy manner.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we should think of agri-solar, use land below the solar panels as well as rooftop segment. These are the two areas land problem will be solved.
Thank you.
So the first one is going to be contextualize the solutions. We've talked about a lot of different solutions, but they might be anecdotal. We need to think about the implications before scaling them. Second is to bring those who are going to lose the most on the same table as those who are going to gain the most, or rather change the table itself.
Thank you. I would like to, I know we are completely out of time. Just a few more seconds. I would like to really thank all the panelists, and I think the panel brought out this aspect clearly that unless we address, proactively address environmental and social issues, it will be challenging to meet our ambitious RE targets. It is in the interest of meeting and promoting, the RE in the country that we do need to look at these issues a bit seriously. And my last one point I would say is like, wastelands. Just the term itself is very loaded. Just think about the historical origin of this term. It was not always degraded land. So keep, I think, that in mind when some, particularly terms like Gair Mumkin Pahad, Siwai Chak and all that, they just meant something else earlier. And now that the term wastelands gives a different connotation to it. So I'll stop here. Thanks. We have unfortunately run out of time for any audience questions, but please do, talk to the panelists during the lunch break or other breaks. Thank you so much.